In the winter of 1804, the celebrated explorers Lewis and Clark halted their great journey across the newly purchased Louisiana Territory and spent the winter in present-day North Dakota, living near a tribe called the Mandan. Nearly 200 years later, in the summer of 2003, I had the opportunity to go on my own journey into uncharted territory. My parents and I took a trip through North Dakota, a trip that included stops in Medora and Theodore Roosevelt National Park, the Coal Creek Power Station and the Great Plains Synfuels Plant, Fort Abraham Lincoln, and even the very fort that Lewis and Clark had constructed during their stay in the Missouri River Valley centuries earlier, Fort Mandan. And, of course, my first venture out west wouldn't have been complete without an encounter with Native American culture. Near Bismarck, my family and I visited On a Slant Village, a reconstructed Mandan settlement located on land owned by the State Historical Society. I got the chance to walk through Mandan lodges, interact with Mandan tools, and learn massive amounts of information about Mandan culture and history. I learned about everything from their farming techniques to the structure of their villages, from their early encounters with Europeans to their various social and religious practices, including an awfully gruesome, yet somehow fascinating religious ceremony called Okipa. However, my visit to this village was devoid of much critical thought. That is, until reflecting on it now, nearly a decade later. It occurs to me now that many of us, as members of a society who have little to no personal experience with modern Native American civilization and tradition, fail to appreciate the dynamic growth and development of Native culture over time. In other words, we tend to relegate and confine our notions of Indians and Indian practices to the distant past and fail to appreciate their modern manifestations. I think that this lack of appreciation for Native American culture can be attributed, at least in large part, to one issue: limited, narrow exposure. The portrayal of American Indians in Hollywood, even in more liberal films like Dances with Wolves or Broken Arrow, is almost entirely confined to the era of American expansion. In elementary and secondary education, we learn about natives and their culture primarily in the context of the era of American expansion. On vacations and on tourist visits to historical sites, nearly all of the information presented about Native Americans is in relation to their role in the constant westward push of the era of American expansion. It is also interesting to note that this confinement of a group of people to a particular era or historical time period is a practice that is unique to the Native Americans. We, as a society, do not restrict our views of African Americans, Latin Americans, or Asian Americans to a particular era. If we've grown to recognize and respect these cultures, why should our treatment of natives be any different? It strikes me now that during my temporary expedition into Mandan history and culture at On a Slant, I was unwittingly embodying this fundamental flaw in American society's modern view of Native Americans. Perhaps I wasn't emulating Lewis and Clark as much as I had originally liked to think. Instead of engaging with and growing to cherish the Native culture around me as they had, I had restricted my adventure into Native culture to a solely historical version. I believe that it is paramount that we shake off this narrow view of natives and their culture and cease to constrain our figurative expeditions into Native American culture solely to bygone eras. Let us instead couple a merited appreciation of the history of Native Americans and Native culture with the continued exploration and development of an appreciation for modern, current Native Americans and Native culture as well.